Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our New Jersey Cannabis Training Academy webinar, live Q&As with our instructors. Today, we are going to be focused on Level 9B, specifically on wholesale and distribution, and I'm here with our instructors, Sequoia Turner and Charles Smith. Before we get into all the goodies, as always, just want to shout you guys out for participating in a CTA. We're excited to see a lot of you getting through Level 9. This is where you're meeting a lot of the heavier workload when it comes to really understanding the license types, the SOPs, all the backbone and structure it takes to build out these businesses. So we're excited to get into it, especially around this part of the supply chain, which is quite new to New Jersey, but not new to our instructors. We've been watching it come alive and really interested to see how it's going to play out over a long period of time. But I'm happy that we're going to be able to get some insights from both Sequoia and Charles. So with that, I'll just jump right in, but with some intros. We'll start with Sequoia. You might just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and how you come to be in the industry, specifically around wholesale and distribution.
Excellent. Yes. Thank you so much, Precious. Well, my name is Sequoia Turner. I have been in the cannabis industry for over a decade now, opening dispensaries across the US. A lot of the organizations that I have worked for have been fully vertical enterprises. So, in addition to being retailers, we've also produced and cultivated. And in that capacity, had to move our product across the state of Nevada, which is how I became well versed in the world of wholesale and distribution.
Thanks. Thank you so much for that. And with that, I'll pass it over to Charles. Let's get a little bit about you.
Thank you so much, Precious. It's great to be here with both of y'all tonight and all of y'all out there. I've have also been in the industry, in the regulated industry for about a decade, and in that time period have worked with cannabis businesses in every aspect of the industry. And right now I am focused on a business that is a distributor in Massachusetts. So we focus on wholesale and distribution. So that's really how I find myself here, but I'm, excited to share kind of all of any insights that might be helpful to the students out there tonight.
Thank you. Trust me, I think it's all going to be helpful, especially here in New Jersey. Before we get into specifically about SOPs, can you each just kind of tell us about the distribution and wholesale side of the industry? Because again, here in Jersey, almost is it's so new, it feels foreign. Just a little bit about like what it is, what to expect. I think it's a really important part of the supply chain. Not every legal market has it. So can you guys just tell us about some of the special sauce that makes the wholesale distribution side like quite lucrative and important? And Sequoia, I'll start with you.
Oh, okay, perfect. Um, to piggyback on what you're saying, I think it's vital within the industry to have a very robust wholesale business, but only also distribution. And I think that is what the customer and consumer and what the voters voted for was being able to select a variety of products to fit their needs. And if you really take it down to its core, that is what wholesale and distribution is. It's ensuring that the product gets into the customer's hand compliantly and efficiently. Um, and for retailers and production and cultivators both, they rely on distributors having a high level of integrity and a high level of responsibility when handling their product. Um, a lot of organizations don't have a distribution license
Mhm.
currently, so they really rely on distributors to, when they are on site and interacting with retailers, to represent their brands in a manner that is representative of their organizational values.
Anyways, Charles, anything to add on to that?
No, I think those are all really good points. I think just to kind of combine two things that Sequoia said in her introduction, that the industry has evolved in a way where distribution has become essential because it went from an industry where everything was vertically integrated and there wasn't a lot of at least the early states, Colorado, here in Massachusetts, we had similar vertical and like kind of forced vertical integration as people look at it this way, at least in in medical here in Mass. And I think that the lessons to take away from being a vertical is that it's very, very difficult to do all of those things really, really well. Like that was not a good model. There's a reason why the majority of businesses in any industry are not vertically integrated. Like vertical integration is rare in a lot of ways. So I think the distribution aspect is what makes the is kind of what ties back to vertical integration, right? As Sequoia was saying, like distributors are what get the product into the hands of the retailers and ultimately the consumers, and that distribution network and the creation of those networks is something that has become vital because it's not just vertically integrated businesses anymore, right? In order to be, you have to be everywhere. There are especially in larger states like New Jersey, there are these kind of micro markets, and it just would be impossible, almost impossible to get everywhere in the state without a strong distribution network. And I also think it is indicative of what other businesses do as well, right? It's indicative of what the alcohol industry does, what the food industry does, right? It is run by distributors generally in those businesses, and not the other way around. And I think there's certainly there's margin everywhere along the supply chain. It's just a matter of capturing it and operating efficiently. But I do think it's, can be very lucrative, and it's essential in today. So yeah, that's kind of just jiving off of those two points. I think that's incredibly important and something that not everyone has really thought about in the right way. They just see a lot of like my third party transporter here in Massachusetts, I talk to my contact there more than my wife at times, right? I mean, I'm on the phone with him constantly. I know I can get Austin at any time of night, and it's because he's vital to what we do. If I wasn't able to get my products in, when they needed to be in the retailer's hands. So looking at those that part of the network as partners too, right? And not as rivals or other companies. Like I think that is an important part of it as well.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Honestly, I live by a port, so there's trucks literally on the highway going, and I'm like, I wonder what's in that truck or who is it going to get to, and not just like your big box stores. So when I think of distribution, I think about cannabis. I see this huge opportunity there. And just one thing I want to clarify for students here in Jersey, our wholesale distribution licenses are two different licenses, right? So our class 4 license, which is the distribution license, really just allows you to pick up from facilities and drop off. So you are that transporter courier to get from cultivation manufacturing facilities to retail facilities. And you have ability to store for a limited amount of time versus the wholesale license, which we're going to dig into a lot too in terms of these differences, allows you to purchase product from cultivators, manufacturers, set prices, and sell and distribute brands now from your wholesale facility, which can feel a little bit like the distribution license without those mechanisms in the front. So if you guys ever have questions about that, students that are listening in, it's broken down in our TTA courses. But specifically, we're going to talk about SOPs, right, which is the bulk of the courses. What are some of the most critical SOPs needed for both a wholesale and distribution operation? Sequoia, I'll let you start with distribution, and Charles, you can tell us about wholesale. Like, what are the most important SOPs you think are needed when you are just starting to write those SOPs on how to distribute products?
First and foremost, the most critical one is having a very thoughtful intake process. So how are you picking up the goods from the client? What what should your team be looking for? Are they weighing? Are they doing case counts? What locking, container are they using? Knowing how you're going to represent yourself when meeting a new client and onboarding them and telling them, number one, these are the steps that we take to, number one, validate that what you're giving us is truly what you're giving us, making sure the manifest matches the product, the weights, All of those items need to be very detailed and structured, because you, as owner operator, may not be there for every single pickup. And so you need to make sure that it's very clear and easy to understand for any staff members, but also making sure that you're being compliant with the regulations of New Jersey.
Nice. And Charles, what about you? What are some of those critical SOPs needed on the wholesale side?
I think in two of the most critical ones in my mind that I don't think people generally focus on or think of are kind of how do you onboard people, your onboarding process
Mm,
for customers, and then and then on the back end your invoicing process, right? So how do you get to know who the customers are going to be and how do you get paid, right? Because without setting those two things up properly, it's really challenging. And I think uh from a wholesaling perspective, like that also ends up falling a lot on your salespeople. So I think the more that you have a process that takes care of those things, the more the salespeople can focus on selling, which is what they should be doing. And in that same vein, just like having a just a strong, you know, tracking system of sales or and sometimes that's not, you know, it's not a HubSpot. It's not one of these kind of robust platforms. It's just a simple spreadsheet, right?
It's
That
Google Sheet.
everybody uses, right? Like I think people get way too and certainly my company is guilty of this too. We get way too caught up in this kind of tech stack and we have all these tools, but unless you really take the time to use those tools properly, in some ways you're better off with just a spreadsheet for wholesaling especially, right? Because there aren't really that many things that you're tracking that aren't tracked in the third party tracking software somewhere else, right? So that it's just, you know, who do we sell to? Who are those individuals? Where is all their licenses and all of their proper information, and how do we get paid? Then if you know, if you can do those two things well, the selling
you're off to
will
the
take
start.
care of itself.
That's good. Well, you guys mentioned something too, and Sequoia, I saw you kind of jump in there about integration because there is a lot of different tech stacks. You know, cultivations, manufacturers, they use different things. Retailers use different things. So, how do you build an SOP around how you're going to maybe do intake or move product when one might be using one company for their POS or their like what sort how do you create an SOP that manages the integrations needed to collect and transfer and distribute and wholesale products? Have you found that challenging at all?
On the distribution side, I would say it's a little bit less challenging. There are only a few programs that are state regulator approved when it comes to mapping out your routes, and then communicating, your pickup and intake to customers. So from a distribution standpoint, that's fairly easy. To Charles's point, the invoicing is always tricky, whether it's QuickBooks or another platform used to make sure that you're collecting payment. Making sure that is integrated in is also key and vital. I sometimes forget to think about profitability, but profitability is always key. Um, and then regarding additional tech stacks that needed, I really agree with Charles on that front. Sometimes we tend to overthink it, or we're building a mansion when what we really just need is a nice little safe insecure ranch house, because that is the volume of the business that you're currently doing. I think it's very important to always have a vision for scaling. So if I take on, 10 more clients, what does that do to my business and what tools do I need? But until you're there, I would always caution anyone not to overinvest, because those startup margins can be quite slim.
Mm. Charles, anything to add there?
No, no, I think that's good. I think in terms of building SOPs, I think you kind of have to build SOPs that are kind of that have nothing to do with software and then integrate the software into the SOP rather than vice versa, right? Like I think like that overcomplicates things and from a wholesale a wholesaling side. you know, there aren't that many platforms that, whether or not there aren't that many platforms that are out there in the industry, right? There are a handful probably that people use as true kind of wholesaling platforms. And I think people need to really push the service providers too, and not get sold a bill of goods or whatever when it comes to really vet those things and ask them real questions, because they're oftentimes, sometimes they're able to answer them, sometimes they're not.
And I would
Your
piggyback on
business is ultimately going to rely. Go go ahead, go ahead.
I was
Oh,
gonna say I'd piggyback on that and just it's always good to ask for references
Mm,
and case studies. Those tech investments are quite large, and as I mentioned, those margins, startup margins are quite slim. So making sure that you have an understanding of what you're getting into. Most service providers have no issue giving you, 2 to 3 references of business, especially within your own industry so that you can reach out and just say, hey, what are you experiencing? What are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the challenges you've had? And what are some of the opportunities with that tech stack?
thanks. Thanks for breaking that down because I know it does get somehow complicated when you look at all the different available technology to support these license types. I want to move a little bit over to product and like just the storing and transferring the product. You guys mentioned intake, whether you weigh it, whether you count it by hand. What do you think are some of the best practices when you are now entrusted with someone else's product to get to point B? And what are some common mistakes you see happen with just that intake process of product? Like, what is the ultimate no-no to do at that stage?
I unfortunately, when the industry was very new, I would see one individual come for a drop off of goods, and there would maybe be 6 to 7 large totes of eights. And it's one individual. They are then relying on the dispensary teams to count um, each and every product to ensure that it is correct. And I would caution against that in the beginning. Number one, some dispensary team members don't quite have the eye for detail that you would think they would have when it comes to product intake. I would always encourage a distributor to do either a quick count of their own, at least a box count, just to make sure and knowing like, oh gosh, I have 16 boxes. None of them have been tampered. They all have they enter, the non-tamper tape on top of them to make sure they haven't been tampered. I'm gonna sign off that I got 16 when I picked it up from the production licensee, and I'm signing off again that I'm dropping off 16. I've recounted before I've given them to the dispensary team, is what I always say. Always, always, always double count. And it's always good that, you know, I know the regulations state two, which is great, to make sure that you're both counting as a check and a balance, or both individuals are counting as a check and a balance.
And Charles, what about some of the security SOPs that happen with intake and just managing and storing product? Because when on the wholesale side, when you after you get product from the production, that's kind of your product now, right? Versus on the distribution side, you're just still transferring for others. Um, oh, looks like Charles dropped off a little bit here. Maybe he'll jump back on. But Sequoia, maybe you can help me with some of this question. How is that does it differ from the wholesale side where now they have to maybe establish new processes when they get that product? Is it different on the seed to sell tracking system? And if so, how does the seed to sell tracking system pretty much play into like building these manifests? Is that's where you're doing your counting, or do you have to create that mechanism and spreadsheet and then enter it into your seed to sell tracking?
I put everything into seed to sell tracking first. That is the platform of truth, is what I always say, and that is the platform that the state is always auditing to make sure that you're being compliant. So having multiple spreadsheets, I would definitely discourage people from maintaining that. Um, you should have your seed to sell tracking system. You should be auditing it every single day to ensure it's compliant, to ensure that all the manifest information is correct. I even encourage pre-checks before pickup to make sure that every single item on the manifest is correct. Whether it's, driver's license numbers, agent card numbers, licensee numbers, correct addresses. It is sometimes surprising how a zip code can be off, or northeast versus southwest on a street in a very busy metropolitan area. Those items are important because you do not want drivers lost when they have a very, tight timeline to deliver.
Mm. And Charles, I was asking, like, what are some of those security measures and SOPs, and how do you transfer that into a SOP when it comes to collecting product from production licensees? Because now with the wholesale license, those are your products now, right? Like to sell and do with as if it were your own. Is that correct? And Charles, I don't think we can hear you if you're speaking. It looks like you may be a little bit frozen.
Oh, there you,
I hear you. Hey,
you're in,
Charles, can you hear us?
there you go.
Yeah. Can you hear us, Charles? I think maybe he's still having an issue. Charles, if you can hear us, drop it in the chat. If not, we'll come back to that question for you because I'm really still interested to see a little bit of that difference. Um, Still along the sides of product, we know that vehicles are involved with distribution and wholesale, which can be a really challenging part. This is not a stationary situation. Vehicles move all the time. What are some SOPs around just, that vehicle management? How you loading up vehicles? Is the production team loading it up and then the retail team pick it up? Are you just kind of like hands off? Or as you as a distributor, are you responsible for the care and protection of that product while it's in your hands?
It's a great question. As a distributor, I would encourage the distribution team to load the vans. Depending on how many deliveries they are attending to, there's a certain way to load it, which is your furthest delivery out. You want to load that first so that what is closest to the door is the first dispensary product, first dispensary's product that you're going to visit. So it's little things like that to help just make each delivery more efficient. One thing that I always encourage anyone to do is to make sure that you have really robust protocols about inspecting your vehicle each day, checking to make sure tire pressure, knowing when the oil change is due. Um, I've been in a situation where unfortunately we were down a van because we forgot to renew registration. Little things like that. And you look at the license every day, you look at the license plate, and you don't realize that yes, it's due in April, but it was due April 1st, and now you cannot use that van, which cuts into the amount of deliveries you have, and now you are putting your partnerships at risk. And so making sure that you have great protocols about daily audits of the vehicle, and making sure that on a monthly basis, you have some calendar invites or someone's responsible for knowing, listen, I'm going to check once every month to make sure the insurance and the registration's in there. I'm going to check the dates on both to make sure that we have the correct dates. It's also very easy if you're not paying your insurance premium annually, if you're just doing it on like a quarterly basis or every month or so, to make sure that the insurance paperwork reflects that. Unfortunately, it is a vehicle. The roads are sometimes unpredictable. And so I've experienced everything from a van being stuck on the other side of a mountain pass that was closing due to a snowstorm. Um, Unfortunately, an accident that happened with the van. And that in that moment, the driver did not know what to do. And so it is very important that you have protocols around emergency situations. If the vehicle's in an accident, if it gets a flat tire, if it overheats, things of that nature, you definitely don't want, even if you buy the van new, you don't want to assume the van will always be up and working.
Hmm. Thank you for that answer too, because I know vehicle management, fleet management plays a big part into distribution. Charles, are you able to hear us again?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was having some technical issues.
It
But
wouldn't
but
be as
what I
good.
heard is what
It
I
wouldn't
heard
be a webinar
is
without
how
it.
yeah, that's how I would have answered it, you know. In general, I heard a little bit of what Sequoia was just saying. It got cut out earlier, but like redundancy. Like you can't. I had a professor in law school who, you know, taught us a lesson by, you know, he had his textbook that was coming out, and we were proofreading it, right? Because you can't proofread your own work, right? And we would find his typos, and here, this is the professor, and like you cannot do those things on your own, right? You can't proofread your own work. You can't count on your own. So I think you have to have that redundancy built in. Oh, can you hear me?
Nice.
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay,
Perfect. So
cool.
tell us a little
Sorry.
bit about tell us a little bit about how SOPs can help ensure proper quarantined, expired, or recalled products. When that happens on the wholesale side, what does that look like, and how do you guys jump into action? Or does it really impact you when a recall happens on the wholesale side?
So, I mean, in terms of when a recall happens, that typically triggers your, you know, recall plan that you have in your SOPs, which would really like you know, typically when when those things happen, they're flagged in the regulatory system that you have this and those are placed on hold, on administrative hold, and that's typically how you would you know, find out about that from a wholesale side. I mean, that's not really your responsibility. That's more the responsibility of the retailer in that instance. So there's, I mean, I'm sorry, the retailer, and then the product manufacturer or cultivator. So I mean, you certainly have to have a plan in place for those aspects. But again, it really just depends upon, you know, what the product is and whether or not you still have any in your on site that hasn't been sold to retailers.
Mm, thanks. I want to kind of reel it back in and go to a place of just like true functionality. Like if I am a license holder or want a aspiring license holder, where do I even begin to write these SOPs? Is there you know, content out there that already exists that can help support? Is it just trying to like create in my mind what the full process would be and then start to write processes for that? Like I can't imagine some of the first people to attempt this is just like, you know, where do you go when you're like, all right, I have this license. I need to start writing out my SOPs. What are some of the first things that you need to put pen to paper to? And how do you even start to do that? Do you need to get a compliance consultant at that point?
I would highly recommend a compliance consultant, as if not at the beginning, to just lay out bullet points of making sure that you're hitting these regulatory points that are required for a licensee. And then I would also have them do a check towards the end of your, you know, of your writing of your SOPs, just to make sure that everything's compliant. I always say you should always do a legal check of the SOPs that you've written. And regarding where to start, now there are a few organizations out there that can give you a cachet of SOPs, and then what you'll have to do is go in to revise them to your regulatory environment. Um, that is always a good starting point. But I do caution you all to make sure that you understand not only the cannabis regulations, but also just the jurisdictional business regulations in which you're operating, because there's oftentimes things that aren't mentioned within the regulations that are required from a business operator in your county, in your city. And so making sure that you, number one, you have a very thorough understanding of that before you begin writing is key.
Charles, anything to add to
Yeah,
that?
and I would say that the regulations themselves are the best place to start when writing your SOPs, and frankly, I think they often serve as the best outline, right? In terms of, well, I mean, whether or not I like to differentiate between compliance control documents and SOPs, and compliance control documents being, what you need for the regulator in order to carry out those actions, and SOPs being like, if you get hit by a car and somebody else needs to operate the business, what do they do on day one? They could pick up this binder or this folder on the drive, and they can do all the practical things. Ultimately, SOPs are a combination of those two things, I think, in some ways. But starting with the regulations, I think, is the best place to start. And I think very few people take responsibility for knowing the regulations, and you should. You don't need a lawyer or a consultant to read the regulations, right? They're digestible. They're overly complicated, but so I think, not only the operator but every employee should have read the regulations and understood them. So that's my always start with the statute.
And speaking of employees, like your drivers, your dispatch, people who are a part of bringing the wholesale distribution license together, how do you get them prepared to take on a task with the SOPs? What does that training look like? Drivers can encounter so many different things on the road. How do you really get your staff prepared to run your wholesale and distribution licenses?
I'll take that one. Similar to Charles, we have what we call our SOPs, and those go to the state. And then we have what we call processing guides. And the processing guides really walk you through when you come in the morning, you're going to clock in here, you have 7 minutes. It really breaks down the day-to-day steps of how one does their role and what their responsibility is. And then when it comes to making sure that staff is understanding and can execute what is being asked to them, I think it's really important to make sure that not only do they have kind of, a day, maybe 2 days to read through the material, ask any questions, but also an additional 2 days to shadow someone else if possible within the role so that they can ask questions in the moment, they can see live operations, and that they start to feel comfortable before they are live and fully responsible for making sure that they're executing um, the process guides, but also the SOPs and being compliant.
Charles, anything to add there on how do you prep your employees to be trained on your SOPs? And also, I'll throw you an extra one. Have you found that you needed to amend an SOP based on the process that happened and probably didn't work out fully or just could be tweaked a little bit? How do you then retrain your staff who may have been doing something one way to now adhere to the new process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to answer the second question first, all the time. SOPs are changing absolutely all the time. The state changes the regulations. There's you talk to other operators, you find out, oh, hey, they're doing it this way. We can do it that way. I think there's there are best practices are constantly evolving in the industry because the regulated industry is so young, so to speak. So I think that happens all the time, and you communicate that to everyone clearly, right? And I think however you communicate, whether that's through email, whether that's through a messaging app. I mean, however you communicate that, you just make that clear to people, and maybe put some reminders places where, that SOP is relevant to let people know that has changed. I think I'm having visual reminders can be really valuable for circumstances like that. And, I think finding a way in terms of in training employees and getting them comfortable with SOPs, finding a way for them to really be able to spend some time with that material as Sequoia mentioned, and then see it in practice without having to carry it out themselves is very helpful, and really, emphasizing the importance of those things. Oftentimes, a lot of employees in the industry have worked at other businesses within the industry. They tend to move around a lot, and I think you can get into a lot of trouble when somebody brings their bad habits over from somewhere else, or that we did it over here, so that's how I'm going to do this specifically. I think, just emphasizing how important they are to people, and again, having them in a place where people can access them easily and they're not hard to find. And some of these things might seem obvious, but I think going really emphasizing the importance of them and making them accessible are two places to start, because ultimately if they're not accessible and people don't take them seriously, then nobody's going to pay attention to them anyway, and then you have all kinds of other issues that stem from that.
Mm. And then speaking of just like, training and understanding your SOPs, so Corey, you mentioned like auditing them and like also kind of reviewing them often. I know sometimes the state can kind of come in and say, hey, hello, run it, show us everything you've been going on and how it's working, your processes. But how often do you do that internal audit? How often do you refresh your SOPs with your staff and your program? And also, are there any changes that you ever need to let your partners know about that so that they can adhere to maybe a process you have in place?
Yes, yes, to both. Regarding how often, some SOP revisions are just in the moment because employees are grateful, very clear about communicating, hey, I'm having an issue here. Um, I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say the SOP was, I need you to count every single item. An employee may come back and say, listen, our orders are totaling, anywhere from 175 to 200 items. It is a bit impossible for us to count that and then get to our next drop off. Can we do case counts? And so at that point, you look at it and you say, okay, as long as the, production facility or cultivation can put the non-tamper over it and we can just do box count, carton count. And that is the only thing that you need to make sure that you pick up 16, you're dropping off 16 instead of a unit count. Um, and sometimes it is telling partners, I'm trying to think, it used to be back in the day, people would take pre-roll bundles and literally just put a rubber band on them, put them into a cardboard box, and then not tape the box, kind of do the flap thing, and then say there's 400 within the box. That's no longer an SOP that is approved from us. It does not ensure um, clean chain of command for the product from the production facility to the retailer. So we need all your pre-rolls to be packed in an enclosed container that our drivers cannot get to. And then we'll communicate that out to our partners to make sure, unfortunately, if we come to pick up an item and it's not packaged that way, we will reject that item. And then you're going to have to take that up with your retailer because it's not compliant for us and we're not willing to break our SOPs to accommodate that.
Sequoia, that example reminded me that you are an OG in this game because to reference the back in the day wraparound rubber band
Yes,
pre-rolls and some of
yes,
the things we've seen earlier on, you would definitely you had to be there to know.
yes, yes.
You had
Is
to
it
be
10 in this bundle? Wait, it's actually 8. And so that's why it's really important that you're communicating those standards to your partners.
Yeah. And Charles, on the wholesale side, there's tons of partnerships you guys work with, right? Sometimes every dispensary has a different SOP for their pickup. I mean, for their drop off or receiving rather, whether they want to receive only Monday, Wednesdays at this certain time, and maybe they only want to receive with this stuff. How do you have to create an SOP for every retailer that you partner with, or do they just have to comply with an SOP you create?
I think that's a real battle of the SOPs right there, right? I think that it can be very challenging when everybody's processes are different, and there, as I mentioned before, there aren't a ton of best practices. So I think, you know, you really do have to create kind of like a mini SOP for every retailer to know that this is how they like it. And I think more so, or less so about like the technical side is a little bit what you're referencing. Like, would they take drops between now and then? I think more like your sales reps have to know the buyer, because it's ultimately going to be get back to the buyer. And if it's not done exactly the way the buyer, like, it's more about almost a personality thing in some ways, right? What does the buyer prefer? They prefer this, and this, and doing it that way. Not only are you going to comply with their SOP, which you have to, but you're going to get a reward, right? You show that you're listening to what their concerns are, and that you are able to, customer service business, and they're your customer. So I think more along those lines, but obviously, yes, you have to know when people take deliveries. Like, we have a customer here in Massachusetts. He's on Cape Cod. The transporter only goes to Cape Cod on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That's just the way they do it. So, if he's getting product, then it's going out on Monday or Wednesday, right? Those little things. Right? That's just a small example, but yeah, I do think that those are your customers. You have to know them. So I think it's less about those technical things and more about, that's going to frustrate him if you scheduled something to be picked up on Thursday that he's not that he was expecting that Thursday, and he's not getting it till Tuesday, right? That's a problem, because you're in the summer, on the weekends, that's his high season. That's when he has to, really push it. So I think that and also I mean, sometimes people go way over the top, and you have to say, well, wait a second, I'm sorry, that's just not something that we can do, right? Like, this request is completely unreasonable. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that, right? Even to your customer. So it's really a balance.
Nice. And as we wrap up, because again, these licenses are so new here in Jersey, I want to ask each of you, like, what really makes, starting with you, Sequoia, what makes for a successful distribution enterprise?
That's a really, really great question. Um, it is making sure, I think you touched on it a little bit, Charles. Number one, having an element of service. Um, I have seen distribution use former military and law enforcement, and there's just not quite the white glove service that maybe you would expect with your products, because they are more concerned with keeping security and less concerned with maybe passing on some educational facts or product information they may know about the product that, someone in production passed along to them. Um, I think in any industry, when you're dealing with clients and customers, um, service and building a trust-based relationship is very important. Charles spoke a little bit about it earlier. Some relationships, you're going to be able to reach them right away, and that is very, very valuable to processors and cultivators, of knowing, like, I know that I can get a turnaround if a dispensary sells out of my product, which is a really wonderful thing to happen. I know that I can get them replenished within 24 hours because I'm going to call Charles and he's going to make it happen. I think ensuring that there's always an open line of communication, and that you do have a trust-based relationship with your clients and your retailers is very important.
Yeah. Likewise, Charles, what makes for a successful wholesale enterprise?
I think having a similar, very similar to what Sequoia said, having a being a good partner, right? Like, you have partners on both ends of the supply chain, right? So you have to be a good partner to your cultivators and manufacturers, and you have to be a good partner to to your retailer. And I think that means different things to different people, but everybody knows when you have a good partner, you have a bad partner, right? Like going, not going above and beyond too for people, right? You have to, it's hospitality, right? You have to be hospitable and really understand that, the customer, people are going to remember not necessarily, that you didn't, get something there the exact time they needed it, but you did it right, or made them feel, you let them know that you were putting in effort in order to make things right on their end. And I think, that old adage that people won't remember what you say or what you did, but how you made them feel is directly applicable to this. And sometimes, people choose who to use as a wholesaler or distributor based upon relationships, like anything else in this industry, right? It's a very small industry, and it's still based, largely on relationships. So having those relationships, I would leads to, and cultivating them and nourishing them leads to a successful business.
Yeah. I appreciate that answer so much because here in cannabis, I don't think people realize like we're still a community. How you treat people, how you maintain relationships is kind of like the epitome of how, we get business done because we're so interconnected in the supply chain from top to bottom. So I appreciate both of those answers so much. So we're wrapping up here. And again, this will be on our website so everyone can come back and watch. But one thing I asked every instructor doing this is just what are the benefits of taking your course here with the CTA if you are a new and inspiring licensee?
That's a great question. Cannabis is, and the industry is, while it is evolving and progressing, I think in a very beautiful way, there's still some obstacles. And being able to speak with individuals and learn from individuals who can take the lessons that they've learned from real life experiences and make them applicable to each new individual coming into the industry, to serve as a guide and to have the words serve as, a map of things not to do and pitfalls to avoid, I think is key. The really great thing I think about each instructor with the CTA is that we've all experienced a myriad of different obstacles and opportunities. And so there's just a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of, I like to call it lived experience. The lived experience is invaluable.
Thanks. And Charles, what about you? What are some of the advantages of taking your course?
I I think, I would echo a lot of the things that Sequoia said, and like I think learning from individuals who've been involved in the industry for longer than some of the students may have been is incredibly valuable, because I think, if nothing else, it offers you perspective about, the progress that has been made in a very short amount of time. And I think that perspective is really valuable to embarking on the journey that you're about to embark on. And I think, we all get caught up in the kind of nonsense of the industry at times, but ultimately, the ability to interact with this plant and freely is incredible based upon, the history of this plant, especially in the country. So having that perspective and always keep that in mind, I think will uh, allow students to really, kind of bring themselves back when, some issue is really, challenging, or there are these obstacles. Ultimately, we get to interact with this incredible plant on a daily basis and you know earn a living and a livelihood from that, and that you know that's why I would take my class, because you hear about all these experiences and again get that perspective. Like if I was opening a business now, I would love to take all of the courses from the CTA, just knowing a lot of knowing some of the instructors and just how serious you know your team and everybody has taken this endeavor. You know, there's nothing else like this out there, right? Like our sole mission here is to help people, right? I mean that I think is there's value in accepting that from the student side.
Well, I thank you both for those answers. I thank you both for joining us on our live Q&A today. It's been so helpful. I'm excited to really see how this license type really grows here in Jersey. I've always felt like it was an important part and a missing part of the supply chain as we were growing here, just because we're seeing that overload on our production facilities and we're seeing more retailers come online. It really feels like it's going to help, especially patient access, which is something we also fight for here in the state. So thank you guys for your work on this, just throughout your careers, and then passing on some of those gems here at CTA. For everyone who joined us or is going to watch, we appreciate you. We really hope this helps, and we will catch you on our next Q&A. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Sequoia.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye.